Hi everyone, welcome to this video tutorial on Nerve. And you might wonder, why do a new tutorial on this? There is stuff online already, and yes, there is. But most videos online are quite old now, and despite them being good explanations, shout out to Sedgwick, I feel it's time for an updated version of these video manuals for 2021 because Nerve still is very much actively developed by Steve Duda and has gained a few interesting additional features within the last years that aren't covered anyway on YouTube just yet. I produce techno, the more underground gritty kind. And as you know, techno producers are always on the hunt for the most efficient drum plugin that also provides the best audio quality. And I work with quite a few of them depending on what I want to achieve that day. So sometimes I like the quirkiness of guys 2, other times I prefer to use the rather extensive sound shaping options of Battery 4, and sometimes I just throw a drum rack in there. But the one plugin I always circle back to is Nerve, because it just hits that sweet spot of efficiency, occasional weirdness and sound design options that I need in my studio sessions. So here's a quick overview of what I'm going to cover in this video, and of course you can check out the timestamps below to quickly jump to the section you are most interested in. So before we start making some of that sweet electronic noise, if you like this video and want to see more in the future, please make sure to leave a like, comment down below if you have any questions, and of course I would appreciate your subscription to the channel as this really helps the YouTube algorithm. So let's get into it, shall we? Alright, so here we are with Nerve. I'm gonna start by explaining this top section over here. So we're gonna start with the browser. You have the option to load drum kits, load different kind of grooves. Then right next to this, we have our swing, where you can choose from a number of different swings and then apply them here accordingly. Next to this, we have our pattern section. So this over here, these numbers, this is some kind of rudimentary song mode. I don't use that very often. I rather use this section right here, which are the individual patterns. So if you want to use more than one pattern, you have the option to chain them, and it's been done by just dragging upwards, and then you can see it adds how many patterns you want to add, and it will play them in succession. Then we have the click, which is just a metronome, and we can enable recording, so you can play in your pads live just by clicking on it or via a Midi controller. These buttons here, H and R. R stands for randomization. So if you click this, R will automatically populate the pattern with a randomized number of steps and velocities. The H, however, looks at all the patterns that you've programmed beforehand and will create a new randomized pattern based on that. So it's kind of an intelligent randomizing pattern function, which is pretty neat. And then we have our master volume on the right side. Then we have our menu, where you have all kinds of different options. The first thing I'm going to do is change the zoom of the UI, because that's one of the new features that came afterwards. So it's as simple as just dragging Nerve to whatever size you want. Make it nice, big and chunky. You can also choose from a number of different presets, and you can set your current zoom as default. Mine's about 130, so yeah, we're right about there. In this menu, we can also load drum kits, patterns just for this pad or for all pads. We can load swing grooves, presets, and preset is just a machine state, so it will load everything that you save as a preset. That includes the patterns, the samples you included, and so on. You can find this option here. Init, you can init one pad, all pads, just the pads on this page or another page which you would be choosing beforehand. init all patterns or init everything. Commands is something I will cover later in this tutorial, especially this section down here. We covered the zoom. So let's get into the nitty-gritty, which is the main sequencer window right here. We have volume, cutoff, resonance, pitch, panning, gate, late, which is just an offset, and the FX send amount. Starting with the volume. Volume is where you start making your patterns. So I have chosen pad 1 here, and now I can draw in my velocity for step 1. This would be a regular 4 to the floor kick drum. I can choose my next pad, do the same there, and so on. You get the drift. But we can also sequence other things in this part of the sequencer. So we can sequence the filter cutoff, the resonance, pitch, panning. We can choose to engage or disengage gates. We have this late function here, which essentially is just an offset. And we have an FX send amount. So I'm going to start to load some sounds into Nerve. And I will choose this nice pack over here. Go to bass drums. The first one is fine already. Pad 2, in most cases, will be my low tom, which I use more as a bass line. I like this one. It's nice and gritty. Pad 3 will be my closed head. And on pad 4, I would need an open head. This one's nice because I can show you some ways to alter the envelope later on with this as well. So Nerve starts with this 1 engaged, and 1 just means that the pad you're on is the one you're editing. When I first create patterns, I like to start in this 16 view because this gives me an overview of all 16 pads. So we can see I already drew in my kick drum. Let's add steps for the low tom. Same for the closed head. And then just open heads on every offbeat. So right now this wouldn't sound very good because it's not gain stage leveled in any way. So let's go to the mix page. And on this page I will just pull everything down initially and then mix it into taste. Okay, so now we got something to work with. So I'm gonna focus on the kick drum first. And in order to do that, I'm gonna mute all the other pads. So we have a few key commands you can use. Command and clicking the pad, and that will mute the pads. Of course, you can also solo the pads if you want to. Just hit the Option key and then click on the pad and it will solo it. So we go into the cutoff lane, and this will be my filter down here. So I'm gonna engage the filter, engage it, and we have low pass filter, band pass, and high pass. I'm gonna use the low pass for this one. Cutoff relatively low, resonance all the way down, and then I can sequence it like this. Same for the resonance. Pitch, panning, gates. I want one hit to appear a little bit later. I can do this. Same goes for an earlier triggering. And then I have my FX send. So if you want to use the built-in reverb, which is made in collaboration with Tal, and you want to route your audio outside of Nerve, then this FX send will just send whatever amount you want to from the pad you've chosen to the effect. So for now, let's just get rid of this. And the reason Nerve is reacting a little bit sluggish right now is because, again, I'm running a beta version. So it might behave a little bit different for you on your computer. Let's get rid of these pitches as well, because a kick drum does only need to be in one key. So let's move on to the toms. Let's unmute them. This is what we have right now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sidechain compress them to the kick drum. So I'm going to choose my kick, and down here we have this little arrow. If I click it, it will tell Nerve, okay, the kick drum is your source signal for the sidechain. And then we can apply the sidechain by using this little slider and this little knob over here, however we see fit. Obviously a bit extreme. Something like this is fine. Also, I'm going to disengage the filter on the kick drum, but I'm going to engage the filter on the toms. This brings me to the filter section. So we have these options right here, and you can drag them up like this to change whatever you're controlling. So right now it's in bipolar mode. You can also choose a unipolar mode. So if I choose envelope, and I'm going to apply just a little bit of it, and you can see this little cursor here, this little dot on the left side of the cutoff is moving. So this is how much I'm going to apply of an envelope to the filter. I'm also pitching it down a little bit. Something like that, because I want to use the toms not as toms, but as a bass line. Moving on to our closed head. And the first thing I want to do here is adjust the velocities. And I'm just going to put something randomly in here. Same for the panning. Unmuting our open head. And this is a nice opportunity to show you the envelope settings in Nerve. So we have attack, decay, hold, sustain, and release at the bottom here. We also have a dedicated gate section. So if we want to do it quick and dirty, we can just use the gate. I'm going to solo the open head. This will just gate our signal, but if we're going to drag down this hole right here, and you can also use these points on your display. Extend the release a little bit, so it sounds more natural. I'm also going to engage a high-pass filter on this. Same for the closed head. Cool. So let's say this is our starting pattern. Next, we're going to have a look at the Precalc section. So the Precalc section is one of the features that's very unique to Nerve. It enables you to apply a ton of effects to just one sound. But once you applied one of these effects, it will be stored in RAM. So that makes Nerve a lot lighter on your CPU. And let me show you what we can do with this. So first of all, we have this pitch right here. We also have a pitch here, but this is a different algorithm. Then we have stretching. You can stretch out your samples like this, and you can see what Nerve does in real time. If you hit Command and the control, it will initialize the control to a 0 level. One of the most requested features by users was that you can actually use numerical values, and we can do that now. So if you double click on here, you can just put in whatever you want. And just like that, you have a numerical value, which is very useful. So then we have this bend feature and bend amount. These two work together. So what bending does is, let's say you have a tom sound, Actually, let's use our tom sound with this so we can hear this. Let's disengage the filter. So if I increase the bend and then reduce the bend amount, you can see that we essentially can create a kick drum out of toms. Because most kick drums, for example, an 808 kick drum is just a sine wave, and then there is a pitch envelope applied to it. So this is what we can do here within Nerve as well. If we want to build our own kick drums, we can just load a sample of a sine wave in here and then go to town with the bend and bend amount. Let's quickly reset these, put my filter back on. And let's use our kick drum for the next example. So we have soft clipping right here, which is what it says on the tin. It's soft clips. And you notice there's a little bit of clicking involved. These parameters here in the Precalc section are not really automatable because you would hear it. The whole point of these is they apply everything you do to the sound and then they store it in RAM. So yeah, not much fun to be had with this when you want to automate it. Then we have a ring mod. And ring mod is a form of amplitude modulation. Then we have this bits section right here. And you can hear the crunchiness coming in. This is reducing the bit rate of the sample. Then we have a sample rate. If any of you ever worked with an older MPC or something like an SP12, you know that sound. Pulse width modulation just applies a DC offset to the sample. So right now we're in positive, now we're in negative, and you can go in between these values. Then we have repitch. And repitch also does what it says on the tin. It repitches your sample, but it will keep the original length of the sample. So if you use any of the other pitch functions in Nerve, the sample will get shorter or longer. Then we have snap, and snap essentially adds a transient to your sound. Or take it away. Spreading is just the stereo spread of the sample, so you can go all to the sides if you want to. Which doesn't really make much sense with the kick drum, but you can also completely mono it. Which is what we want for our kick drum and bass instruments. Then we have these sine, saw, square, triangle, and sub functions. And these are worth experimenting with, especially if you use percussion sounds and you use them melodically or you want to pitch them. These can add some nice character because they will add or subtract the waveforms you see on top. So if you, for example, extract a little bit of the sine information from this sample we're playing right now, there's a lot of sine in it because it's based on a sine wave. If we take that away, we just be left with the top end. If we increase it, you can see on the screen that the sinusoidal part gets even bigger. If we want to use the square function, for example, you can see that the edges of my sample are getting squared out. Sounds a little bit like distortion, but more in a chiptune way. Not very pleasant, but it works fine on other material. Sub. divides your sample by a certain amount and makes it appear lower. And fuzz is another form of distortion. So we have the soft clipping over here already. Let's hear it again. This is what soft clipping does, but fuzz adds harmonics. This is much more similar to something like a red pedal or other guitar pedals. Then we have the normalizing function. We can reverse our sample, we can change the phase, and we can bypass it. In the same area as the Precalc section, we also find this EQ, and the EQ also works in conjunction with your RAM. So this effect will not be applied during your playback, but it will be stored in RAM. And this is just your regular 4-band EQ. And then we have the reverb, and they opted that you have to turn it on first. So let's do that. This is how it sounds, and you can, of course, apply different parameters here like the sizing and the wet-dry amount. And you can see what Nerve does with the reverb algorithm in real time. So this sample is now stored in RAM as well. One thing I didn't mention just yet is this little area here in the bottom right corner. So you have the option to offset the timing of your sample right here, if you want to do so. You can also use the late function, but it behaves a little bit differently. And then we have our choke groups. So on traditional drum machines like an 808 or 909, the open head and the closed head, for example, cannot play at the same time, and you can simulate their behavior on Nerve as well. So if we apply the choke group number 1 to the closed head and the open head, then you can hear that the open head is being cut up by the closed head whenever it plays. It's a very unique kind of swing, and like I said, it's a staple of a lot of older drum machines. So if you want to go for that sound, this is how you get it. Then we have this load button over here. So you can use that to load your samples if you want to. I much prefer to use the Ableton browser because it's much quicker and I know where my stuff is. But once you've loaded a sample into one of the pads, let's choose the kick drum for this. Nerve automatically recognizes which folder your kick drum is in, so you can just skip through the other samples in that folder. Which saves a lot of time. And of course we have our sample panning. We have our pitch. And our fine tuning. Another cool thing about Nerve is how it handles loops. So I just loaded a loop in this pad here, and you can use your browser for this or the load function over here. And then one essential step, of course, is you have to change this little button here until it says loop, because initially Nerve will think this is a one shot, which is apparently not. So now we're in loop mode, and this is how it looks like. And the loop mode has a few different algorithms. Right now we're in the resample mode. This is how it sounds like. And we can use, for example, the gate to our advantage. This sounds pretty similar to how Ableton handles the transient detections when you use the beat warping mode. There's also another mode which is called slice, and it will automatically look for transients and slice them up. And this sounds like this. A little bit on the clicky side for this sample. And then we have the stretch mode. For now, I'm just gonna stay in the resample mode. And we can also use this BPM function over here. Double time times 4. Of course, we can also divide it. Let's hear this in context. And of course, we can also use the sequencer line over here, maybe for the pitch. And let's use a little bit of soft clipping. So as we've covered, Nerve has an internal EQ, but this is only a rudimentary solution, I would say. So chances are at some point you want to use your own plugins like EQs and compressors and stuff like that. And luckily, Nerve has you covered as well because we have individual outputs. So I created a bunch of empty audio channels right here. And I will tell them to listen to Nerve. And we're going to use output 1 and 2 for the kick drum, 3 and 4 for the tom, 5 and 6 for both of our hats, and 7 and 8 for the loop. And then it's just a matter of telling Ableton to listen to these tracks. So I'm going to put all of them on Nerve, and then I will assign track 3 and 4 to the first one. Actually, we have to go back to the kick and put that on 3 and 4 as well, because otherwise we will have the output of the kick on the channel that Nerve lives on. 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's quickly check that we're on the right channels. And this would be 9, 10. And now all we have to do is arm them and tell them to listen to Nerve. And now we can see we have our individual outputs elegantly distributed within Ableton and can do whatever we like with them. So of course, Nerve has a ton of options already built inside for drum sequencing, but if you, for whatever reason, want to sequence drums outside of Nerve, not a problem at all, because Nerve is capable of sending Midi data. And I have an instance opened up here, and we're gonna send out our notes on C1. And I've loaded just the regular 909 kit in Ableton. And as we can see, the bass drum is receiving notes on C1, the rim shot on C#1, and the snare drum on D1. So you just go into the left bottom corner, tell Nerve, send out MIDI data on C1. For pad 2, did the same with C#1. And on pad 3, just to show it to you how I will do it, I just double click and type in D1. And there we go. So now, when I start Nerve, and I tell the 909 core kit here in this section to listen to Nerve MIDI, and then afterwards choose Nerve, it should receive my notes. And it does. Let's quickly move on to the LFO now. So I will choose my closed hat for this because we can hear what we're doing pretty good with this one, I think. You will find the LFO right here. Let's go over the different options. So we have a delay. That just means that the LFO will wait the amount of time you will tell it to wait until it engages, if you want to make a vibrato at the end of a note, for example. Then we have rise, which will fade the LFO in. Retrig just tells Nerve to engage the LFO every time a trig is received. We have a rate. You can adjust that by taste. Pulse width modulation will just apply an offset. Our LFO shape is right here. We have ramp, triangle, sine, cosine, square, random, and that's it. And on the right side we have all of our destinations. We have panning, pitch, filter cutoff, resonance, level, and the starting point of the sample. So let's listen to this. I'm gonna tell the LFO to have a duration of, let's say, 2 bars. Let's start by applying it to the panning. A little bit of pitch. Filter cutoff to the negative side. Add a bit of resonance. And maybe sample start. And there we go. That's the LFO. So sometimes you don't want to program in your beats. You want to use a MIDI controller for this, and you first have to map Nerve's functions to this MIDI controller. This is pretty easily done in Ableton as well. We just click this little arrow right here, click configure, and then we have the option to configure whatever parameter we want to add. But there's an even easier option, which saves a lot of time. I'm going to delete these for the time being. If we hit configure and then we go to the menu and to commands, we have these nifty little features here: publish global parameters or publish pad parameters or FX sense. So if you want to have all the global parameters of Nerve configured and then ready to map to your controller, you just press this button. For the sake of this tutorial, I will choose the pad parameters. And watch what happens now to the bottom left corner. Boom, there we go. These are all the parameters of our pad, and they're now mappable. So now I'm gonna hit Command M, and this brings me into my MIDI mapping section in Ableton. I'm gonna choose the mute function and put it on one of my pads, my Launch Control XL. Leave the MIDI mode, and now you can see that it's mapped already. Same goes, of course, for the mapping of the pads if you want to play them with your MIDI controller, and a lot of different other functions within Nerve. Let's do one more so you can see the process again. I hit Command M. This time I'm gonna choose the panning for pad 1. I'm moving a controller, leave the MIDI mapping mode again, and now when I move my controller you can see I'm controlling the panning. You can also export your patterns and your individual pads as audio files within Ableton or any other DAW of choice. And the way to do that is you press Alt and Command at the same time. And then you just simply drag the pad into your timeline, or in this case, into your session view. You can see this is my kick drum. If you want to export the whole pattern, it's the same key combination, just with the difference that you are pressing Shift at the same time as well. There we go. This is our whole pattern. A performance feature we haven't covered yet is this repeater section down here. And you can control this with a MIDI controller as well. So I'm going to use a MIDI keyboard for this. And this is essentially a stutter effect. So I'm just going to play back the pattern and you will going to hear what it's doing. And you have the option to use a dotted pattern or a triplet. And then you can also choose which of these pads will be affected by the repeater. By default, all the pads are on, but you can turn them off. If you, for example, don't want to affect the kick drum, nice feature if you're playing live. So, I hope this video manual is getting you up to speed on Nerve in 2021 and helps to improve your workflow. I can't stress enough what an absolute beast this plugin is, and I'm sure you're gonna have a ton of fun with it as well. So if you like this video and want to see more tutorials on other plugins in the future, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and comment down below. And I'd like to hear which is your most used drum sequencer and why. But for now, have fun creating some nice grooves, and I'll see you again real soon. Take care.